The courtroom was dead silent. Standing at the witness stand, wiping away fake tears, my stepbrother Kyle looked the judge dead in the eye and swore that I was completely mentally unstable and unfit to make my own decisions. I sat there, frozen like a stone. They really thought they had won. They had bought off a doctor and forged a medical report so perfect that it could easily get me locked away in a mental facility. My entire freedom hung by a single thread. If the judge signed that paper, I wouldn't just lose my rights, I would lose my entire life. Kyle shot me a confident smirk across the room. But he had absolutely no idea what I actually did for a living, or the terrifying truth I had quietly dug up over the past few months. Just as the judge picked up his pen to finalize the ruling, my attorney stepped forward and placed a single, sealed folder on his desk. Annoyed, the judge opened it. But the second his eyes scanned the first page, all the color completely drained from his face. His hand froze. In the heavy silence of the courtroom, he glared at Kyle and demanded, "What is the meaning of this? Before I reveal exactly what happened next, please take a moment to tell me in the comments where you are watching from today and what the weather is like there. I really want to know how far this story of betrayal, patience, and ultimate justice has traveled. You see, to understand why my own family was so desperate to convince a judge that I was incapable of managing my own money, you have to understand exactly what was waiting for me on my 33rd birthday. My name is Clara, Clara Vance. If you were to pass me on the historic, cobblestone streets of Charleston, South Carolina, you probably wouldn't look twice. I wear plain clothes, my hair is usually pulled back into a simple clip, and I've spent the better part of my life perfecting the art of being completely invisible. But as many of you watching this probably already know, sometimes the quietest people are the ones carrying the heaviest secrets. To understand how I ended up in that courtroom, facing a judge who held my entire life in his hands, we have to rewind a bit. I need to tell you about the environment I was forced to grow up in. Have you ever felt like a ghost in your own home? That's exactly how my childhood felt after my mother passed away, when I was just 10 years old. A few years later, my father, Robert, a very wealthy and successful real estate developer, remarried. He brought a woman named Brenda into our massive estate. Brenda wasn't just a stepmother. She was a storm dressed in designer clothes, and she didn't come alone. She brought her son, Kyle, who was exactly my age. From the very first day they moved in, the dynamic of our house shifted completely. Kyle instantly became the golden child. Whatever Kyle wanted, Kyle got. While I spent my high school years working a part-time job at a local bookstore, just to pay for my own college applications, Brenda convinced my father to buy Kyle a brand new $80,000 sports car for his high school graduation. My father, paralyzed by his fear of Brenda's explosive temper, just went along with it. He chose to keep the peace with his new wife, rather than protect his own daughter. I don't say this to sound bitter. I actually learned a very valuable lesson watching Brenda operate. I learned that manipulators don't use weapons. They use words, guilt, and most importantly, they use your money. When we grew up, Kyle decided he was going to be the next big tech billionaire. He started a software startup, and Brenda aggressively pressured my father into funding it with hundreds of thousands of dollars. As for me, I moved out the exact second I turned 18. Whenever my family asked what I did for a living, I told them I was a low-level data entry clerk for a boring corporate firm. I told them I made barely above minimum wage and lived a very simple, struggling life. They loved that. Brenda absolutely loved believing that her stepdaughter was a miserable failure while her son was a CEO. It fed her ego perfectly. But I lied. I lied to them every single day for 9 years. I wasn't a data entry clerk. I had graduated at the top of my class with a master's degree in finance and criminal justice. I was working as a highly classified federal financial crimes auditor. My daily routine didn't consist of typing boring spreadsheets. I spent my days tracking down millions of dollars hidden by white-collar criminals. I exposed corrupt CEOs, traced offshore bank accounts, and handed federal prosecutors the exact evidence they needed to put arrogant, untouchable people behind bars. I loved my job because numbers don't lie. People like Brenda and Kyle lie every time they breathe, but a bank statement, a wire transfer, that is the pure, unfiltered truth. I kept my career a massive secret from my family because I knew that if Brenda ever found out I had a high-paying, powerful federal job, she would find a way to sabotage it or demand money from me. I was completely content letting them think I was a nobody. But everything in our fragile family dynamic violently shattered 3 years ago when my father had a sudden, massive heart attack and passed away. The day his will was read in the lawyer's downtown office is a day I will never, ever forget. Brenda walked into that room wearing black silk, pretending to wipe away tears, fully expecting to inherit my father's entire empire. She assumed she and Kyle would walk away with everything, leaving me completely penniless. And she did get the primary estate, the cars, and a healthy bank account. But then, the lawyer cleared his throat and opened a secondary, highly confidential document. My father, in his final years, had apparently realized the massive mistakes he had made. He knew Brenda would leave me on the streets if she had the power to do so. So, without telling her, he had quietly liquidated a massive portion of his personal stock portfolio. The lawyer looked directly at me and read the words that made Brenda's face turn the color of chalk. My father had placed exactly $5.8 million into an ironclad, untouchable private trust fund. And my name was the only name on it. But there was a catch, a very specific condition my father had written into the document. I could not touch a single penny of that $5.8 million until the exact day of my 33rd birthday. Brenda absolutely lost her mind. She screamed at the lawyer. She threatened to sue the estate. Kyle threw a chair across the room, demanding that the money be transferred to his tech startup immediately, because he deserved it. But the trust was bulletproof. For the next 3 years, all they could do was watch that $5.8 million sit in an account, completely out of their reach. After that day, I cut contact with them. I focused entirely on my career, living quietly in Charleston, saving every dollar I made from my federal job. I just wanted peace. I didn't care about the trust fund. I just wanted to heal. Just a few months before my 33rd birthday, using my own hard-earned savings, I finally achieved my biggest dream. I bought a beautiful, historic cottage right near the water in Charleston. It was my sanctuary. It was the first thing I had ever truly owned. I thought I had finally escaped the toxicity of my past. I thought I was safe, but I severely underestimated the depths of human greed, because right around the time I was painting the walls of my new cottage, Kyle's precious tech startup began completely collapsing under massive debt. And a desperate, greedy family is the most dangerous kind of enemy you can ever have. For the first few weeks after I bought my little historic cottage in Charleston, my life felt like absolute perfection. For those of you who have ever bought your first home using your own hard-earned money, you know exactly what that feeling is like. It's not just about having a roof over your head. It's about safety. I spent my weekends picking out soft curtains, planting hydrangeas by the front porch, and just sitting on my patio with a cup of coffee, breathing in the salty ocean air. I finally had a safe space where Brenda and Kyle couldn't reach me, or so I thought. Even though I had cut personal contact with my stepmother and stepbrother, I still had one lingering tie to them. As a direct beneficiary of my father's estate, I legally retained read-only access to a few of the primary family bank accounts. It was a standard legal procedure to ensure transparency, until my trust matured on my 33rd birthday. For almost 3 years, I never even bothered to look at those accounts. But one rainy Tuesday evening, while I was sitting at my kitchen island with my laptop, a strange instinct told me to log in. Maybe it was the federal auditor in me. My job had taught me that when things are too quiet with greedy people, they are usually plotting something in the dark. I opened the estate portal, and my heart instantly dropped into my stomach. The primary family account, which was supposed to hold the proceeds from the massive estate my father had left behind, was almost completely drained. I leaned closer to my screen, my eyes scanning the transaction logs. My fingers started flying across the keyboard. Within 10 minutes, utilizing the same tracking methods I used to catch federal criminals, I unraveled exactly what Brenda had done. Without telling anyone, Brenda had secretly sold the sprawling family estate where I had grown up. But the truly sickening part wasn't the sale of the house. It was where the money had gone. I tracked a massive, hidden wire transfer of exactly $250,000. Brenda had funneled $250,000 from the house sale directly into Kyle's failing tech startup, desperately trying to keep his bankrupt company afloat. I sat there in my quiet kitchen, absolutely disgusted. But then, a terrifying thought hit me. If Brenda had sold the family home, and she had given all the liquid cash to Kyle, where exactly was she planning to live? The answer to that question came exactly 2 days later. It was a Saturday morning. I was in my garden, wearing old jeans and gardening gloves, when my cell phone buzzed in my pocket. I didn't recognize the number, but I answered it anyway. It was a receptionist from a local moving company here in Charleston. She was calling to confirm the delivery time for a large shipment of furniture. "I'm sorry," I told her, genuinely confused. "I think you have the wrong number. I already moved into my house weeks ago." "Oh, isn't this Clara Vance?" the woman asked. "I have a delivery scheduled for your address this afternoon. The booking is under the name Brenda Vance. The notes say she and her son are moving their belongings into the property today." My entire body went completely cold. The gardening trowel literally slipped out of my hand and hit the dirt. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. My mind, trained by years of high-pressure federal investigations, instantly shifted into survival mode. I thanked the receptionist, hung up the phone, and took a deep breath. Their plan was so incredibly arrogant, it was almost hard to believe. Brenda and Kyle had sold their home, given the money to a dying business, and decided that they were simply going to move into my new house. They hadn't asked me. They hadn't warned me. They just assumed that because I had always been the quiet, obedient scapegoat of the family, I would be too intimidated to turn them away at the front door. They thought they could just bulldoze their way into my sanctuary and live off me rent-free until I received my $5.8 million trust fund. Let me ask you a question, to everyone listening right now. What would you do in that situation? Would you panic? Would you call the police? I didn't do either. I decided that it was finally time to show my stepmother and my stepbrother exactly who they were messing with. I had exactly 4 hours before their moving trucks were scheduled to arrive. I immediately called a local locksmith and paid double for an emergency visit. Within an hour, every single lock on my cottage was completely changed, including the deadbolts. Next, I drove to the local hardware store and bought the biggest, most legally binding, no trespassing sign I could find. I nailed it directly to my front porch railing. Underneath the standard legal warning, I used a thick black marker to write, "Access explicitly denied to Brenda and Kyle Vance. Violators will be prosecuted." Finally, I locked all my doors, closed my blinds, and sat in my living room with my laptop open, waiting. At exactly 2:15 p.m., the heavy rumble of 2 massive moving trucks echoed down my quiet, tree-lined street. I watched through the crack in my blinds as Brenda's luxury SUV pulled into my driveway. Brenda stepped out, wearing her usual expensive sunglasses, looking around my property like she already owned it. Kyle stepped out of the passenger side, looking annoyed, holding a box of his personal belongings. They walked up the steps to my porch. I watched Kyle reach for the front doorknob. He turned it. It didn't budge. He frowned, jiggling the handle aggressively. Then Brenda saw the massive, "No trespassing" sign nailed to the railing. I could see her mouth drop open in absolute shock. That's when my cell phone rang. It was Brenda. I didn't just answer the phone. I hit the FaceTime button, and I quickly merged the call to include my uncle, my father's brother, who was the legal executor of the estate, and two other prominent family members. I wanted an audience. I wanted witnesses. When the video call connected, Brenda's face was practically purple with rage. "Clara," she screamed into the phone, completely ignoring the other people on the line. "What is the meaning of this sign? Unlock this door immediately. The movers are charging me by the hour, and we are moving in." I sat back in my armchair, perfectly calm, looking at her through the screen. "Hello, Brenda," I said, my voice completely steady. "I see you brought some guests. Uncle David, Aunt Sarah. Are you guys on the line?" "We're here, Clara. What's going on?" my Uncle David asked, his voice full of confusion. I looked right into the camera, staring directly into Brenda's panicked eyes. "Well, Uncle David, it seems Brenda and Kyle have decided to forcibly move into my new house today, which is strange, considering Brenda just secretly sold my father's estate and illegally wired $250,000 of the family's liquid assets directly into Kyle's failing business." The silence on the video call was absolutely deafening. Brenda's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Kyle dropped the box he was holding right onto my porch. You have no idea what you're talking about," Brenda stammered, her voice shaking violently. "Actually, Brenda, I do," I replied, holding up a printed stack of the bank transfer logs directly to the camera so my uncle could see them. "I have the wire transfer receipts right here. You sold the house, you gave the money to Kyle, and now you are homeless. But let me make one thing crystal clear to both of you. You will not be living with me. If you or your movers take one more step toward my front door, I am calling the Charleston police, and I will have you arrested for trespassing." My Uncle David, absolutely furious at the revelation of the stolen $250,000, started yelling at Brenda over the phone, demanding an immediate legal explanation. I didn't wait to hear her excuses. I simply ended the call. Through the blinds, I watched the ultimate walk of shame. Brenda, completely humiliated and exposed in front of the entire family, burst into tears on my front lawn. Kyle kicked my porch railing in a fit of rage. But they had no choice. They had to walk over to the moving trucks, tell the drivers to turn around, and drive away, completely homeless and exposed. Sitting in my living room, watching their taillights disappear down the street, I felt a massive wave of victory. I had protected my home. I had stood up to my abusers. But I had made one massive miscalculation. I thought humiliating them would make them back off. I didn't realize that by locking them out and exposing their financial crimes, I had wounded a cornered animal, and a cornered animal is incredibly dangerous. They were broke, they were desperate, and my 33rd birthday, the day I would inherit $5.8 million, was only 3 weeks away. They couldn't take my house, so they decided they were going to try and take my mind. Have you ever noticed how toxic people react when you finally set a hard boundary? They don't apologize. They don't reflect on their own behavior. Instead, they immediately paint themselves as the victims, and they launch a full-scale war to destroy you. After I locked Brenda and Kyle out of my house and exposed their $250,000 theft to the rest of the family, I genuinely believed the nightmare was over. I thought they would be too busy dealing with my furious uncle and their own financial ruin to bother me again. For about 2 weeks, my life returned to normal. I went to my job at the Federal Division, I came home to my beautiful cottage, and I started planning a quiet, solo celebration for my 33rd birthday. My 33rd birthday. The exact day my father's $5.8 million trust fund would finally be legally transferred into my name. I was only 14 days away from total, unbreakable financial freedom. But Brenda and Kyle were drowning. With the family estate gone, the $250,000 completely swallowed by Kyle's failing startup debts, and the rest of the family cutting them off, they were living out of a cheap motel on the outskirts of Charleston. They were desperate, and desperate people will do absolutely anything to survive. It was a Thursday afternoon when the heavy knock came at my front door. I wasn't expecting any packages. When I opened the door, a stern-looking man in a gray suit was standing on my porch. Before I could even say hello, he handed me a thick manila envelope, said, "You've been served, ma'am," and walked briskly back to his car. My hands were shaking as I tore open the envelope. When I read the first page of the legal documents, all the air rushed out of my lungs. I actually had to sit down on my living room floor just to keep from collapsing. Brenda and Kyle were taking me to court, but they weren't suing me for money. They were suing the state of South Carolina for emergency legal guardianship over me. For those of you who aren't familiar with the legal system, a guardianship, or a conservatorship, is a terrifying legal tool. It's designed to protect elderly people with severe dementia or individuals who have suffered catastrophic brain injuries. If a judge grants a guardianship, the person loses every single one of their basic human rights. You can't vote, you can't drive, you can't make your own medical decisions, and most importantly, you cannot control a single penny of your own money. Brenda and Kyle had filed a massive, meticulously detailed petition claiming that I had suffered a severe psychotic breakdown. I read through their claims, feeling sick to my stomach. They painted a horrific picture of me. They claimed that locking them out of the house was a paranoid delusion. They told the court that I was hallucinating, that I was wildly aggressive, and that I was completely incapable of managing my own life. They wrote that because my 33rd birthday was approaching, I was a massive danger to myself, and that if I received the $5.8 million, I would squander it in a manic episode. Kyle, my arrogant, greedy stepbrother, was officially petitioning the court to become my permanent legal guardian. He wanted complete, legal control over my $5.8 million. But you can't just walk into a courtroom and call someone crazy without medical proof, right? A judge needs to see a doctor's evaluation. That's when I flipped to the very back of the legal packet. Attached to the petition was a 12-page psychiatric evaluation signed by a prominent private psychiatrist in Charleston named Dr. Adrian Cole. According to Dr. Cole's official report, he had extensively reviewed my behavior and diagnosed me with severe bipolar disorder and paranoia. He strongly recommended that the court strip me of my rights immediately for my own safety. I sat there, staring at the signature on the paper. I had never met Dr. Adrian Cole in my entire life. I had never stepped foot inside his office. I had never even spoken to the man on the phone. Yet here was a legally binding medical document, signed by a licensed professional, swearing to a judge that I was completely insane. My blood turned to ice. This wasn't just a petty family argument anymore. This was a highly calculated, malicious conspiracy to steal my freedom. But here is the beautiful thing about Brenda and Kyle's arrogance. They were so blinded by their greed that they completely forgot who they were dealing with. They still believed I was a struggling data entry clerk who would just cry, hire a cheap public defender, and lose in court. They didn't know that my mind was trained by the federal government to dismantle conspiracies. I didn't cry. I didn't break down. I walked straight to my home office, booted up my highly secure, encrypted federal laptop, and went to work. I had exactly 7 days before the emergency court hearing to prove that Dr. Adrian Cole was a fraud. It took me less than 48 hours of intense, relentless forensic tracking to find the smoking gun. Dr. Cole wasn't just a psychiatrist. He was a businessman who ran a very expensive private practice that had recently been hit with severe IRS tax penalties. He needed cash, fast. Using my federal auditing clearance, I started tracing the digital footprints left by Kyle's dying tech company. White-collar criminals always think they are clever when they try to hide money. But money always leaves a trail. I found a heavily masked wire transfer routed through a shell LLC owned by Kyle's startup. The transfer was made exactly 3 days before the guardianship petition was filed. The destination? A private offshore account belonging to Dr. Adrian Cole. The amount? Exactly $75,000. Kyle had literally taken a portion of the $250,000 he had stolen from my father's estate and used $75,000 of it to bribe a licensed psychiatrist to write a fake medical report to help him steal my $5.8 million. The audacity, the absolute sickness of it, was almost too massive to comprehend. I printed every single wire transfer log. I printed the IRS tax liens against Dr. Cole. I printed the IP address logs showing exactly where and when the bribe was transferred. I took the entire, massive stack of undeniable federal evidence, placed it carefully into a thick manila folder, and sealed it shut with a wax stamp. I called the sharpest, most ruthless litigation attorney in Charleston, a woman named Sarah Jenkins, and handed her the folder. When she read what was inside, she didn't just agree to take my case. She actually smiled. "Clara," Sarah said, looking at me across her mahogany desk, "when we present this to the judge next week, your brother isn't just going to lose this case. He's going to leave the courtroom in handcuffs." The night before the court hearing, I stood on the balcony of my beach cottage, looking out at the dark ocean. My heart was pounding, but it wasn't out of fear. It was out of anticipation. For my entire life, Brenda and Kyle had treated me like a weak, invisible ghost. Tomorrow morning, inside that courtroom, I was finally going to show them the monster they had created. The morning of the emergency guardianship hearing, Charleston was blanketed in a thick, heavy fog. The air felt suffocating, but as I walked up the marble steps of the county courthouse, wearing a sharp, tailored navy blue suit, my mind had never been clearer. My attorney, Sarah, walked silently beside me, carrying nothing but her briefcase and the single, sealed manila folder containing the forensic evidence I had gathered. When we pushed open the heavy wooden doors of courtroom 3B, Brenda and Kyle were already there. They were sitting at the plaintiff's table, looking like a picture-perfect grieving family. Brenda was wearing a modest, conservative black dress, clutching a tissue in her hand. Kyle was wearing a well-tailored suit, his hair neatly combed. When I walked in, Kyle turned around and shot me a smirk. It was a look of pure, unadulterated arrogance. He looked at me the same way a predator looks at a trapped animal. He was absolutely certain that by the end of the hour, he would be in complete legal control of my life and my $5.8 million. I didn't break eye contact. I didn't flinch. I just walked to the defense table, pulled out my chair, and sat down. A few minutes later, Judge Harrison entered the room. He was an older, stern-looking man with a reputation for having zero tolerance for nonsense in his courtroom. The bailiff called the room to order, and the hearing began. Because this was an emergency guardianship petition, Kyle was called to the witness stand first to explain why I needed to be stripped of my human rights. Kyle took the oath, sat down in the witness box, and immediately turned on the waterworks. Have you ever watched a sociopath act? It is genuinely terrifying how easily they can manipulate their emotions. Kyle looked at the judge, his voice trembling perfectly. "Your Honor," Kyle began, wiping a fake tear from his eye. "This breaks my heart to do this. Clara is my sister. I love her, but ever since our father passed away, her mental state has rapidly deteriorated. Last month, during a severe psychotic episode, she aggressively locked our entire family out of a home we were trying to share with her. She is paranoid. She thinks everyone is out to get her. And with her 33rd birthday coming up, she is about to inherit a massive amount of money. I am terrified, Your Honor. I am terrified that in her manic state, she will squander the money, end up on the streets, or worse, hurt herself. I just want to become her legal guardian so I can protect her." Brenda, sitting at the table, let out a loud, dramatic sob and buried her face in her hands. Judge Harrison looked sympathetic. He adjusted his glasses and looked down at the documents in front of him. "I see here, Mr. Vance, that you have provided a detailed psychiatric evaluation from Dr. Adrian Cole, diagnosing Miss Vance with severe bipolar disorder and paranoia. Is Dr. Cole prepared to testify to this?" "Yes, Your Honor," Kyle said smoothly. "Dr. Cole's report clearly states that Clara is entirely incapable of managing her own finances or making rational decisions." The judge slowly turned his gaze toward me. His eyes were full of pity, which honestly infuriated me more than Kyle's lies. "Miss Vance," the judge said softly, "these are very severe allegations, and a licensed medical professional has signed a sworn affidavit attesting to your mental instability. Before I make my ruling, I need to ask you, what exactly do you do for a living? How do you support yourself?" Kyle smirked again, waiting for me to mumble that I was a struggling data entry clerk. He was waiting for the judge to see me as the pathetic, helpless woman he had painted me to be. I stood up. I buttoned my navy jacket, stood perfectly straight, and looked Judge Harrison dead in the eye. My voice didn't shake. It rang out through the silent courtroom like a bell. "Your Honor," I said clearly, "my family is under the impression that I am a low-level clerical worker. I allowed them to believe that to protect myself. But the truth is, for the past 9 years, I have been a senior financial crimes auditor for the federal government. I hold a top-secret clearance, and my daily job consists of tracking down millions of dollars stolen by white-collar criminals, embezzlers, and fraudsters." The smirk on Kyle's face instantly vanished. Brenda's dramatic sobbing completely stopped. The entire courtroom went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the carpet. The judge's eyebrows shot up to his hairline. "A federal financial crimes auditor?" he repeated, clearly stunned. "Yes, Your Honor," I replied calmly. At that exact moment, Sarah, my attorney, stood up. She picked up the sealed manila folder from our table, walked past a paralyzed Kyle, and placed it directly onto the judge's bench. "Your Honor," Sarah said, her voice sharp and authoritative, "my client is not mentally ill. She is the victim of a highly calculated, malicious financial conspiracy. Inside that folder, you will find irrefutable, federally tracked banking evidence gathered by my client over the last 48 hours. Judge Harrison, looking deeply disturbed, broke the seal and opened the folder. As he flipped through the pages, the silence in the room became suffocating. I watched his eyes scan the documents. I watched his jaw tighten. The pity in his eyes was instantly replaced by a burning, furious anger. "Miss Vance," the judge said, his voice dangerously low as he looked at Kyle, "explain to me what I am looking at." "You are looking at wire transfer receipts, Your Honor," Sarah answered for me. "Those logs prove that Brenda Vance illegally liquidated a family estate and funneled $250,000 into her son's failing tech startup. But more importantly, Your Honor, if you look at page 4, you will see a secondary wire transfer routed through a masked LLC owned by Kyle Vance." Sarah turned slowly on her heels, pointing directly at Kyle, who was now trembling so violently he could barely sit up straight. "Exactly 3 days before filing this guardianship petition," Sarah continued, her voice booming through the room, "Kyle Vance paid exactly $75,000 to the private offshore bank account of Dr. Adrian Cole. He bribed a licensed psychiatrist to falsify a medical document in a desperate attempt to commit conservatorship fraud and steal my client's $5.8 million trust fund. The color completely drained from Judge Harrison's face. He slammed the folder down onto his desk. He glared at Kyle, who was now hyperventilating, completely trapped in his own web of lies. "Mr. Vance," the judge roared, his voice echoing off the walls. "Is this true? Did you attempt to use this court and a fraudulent medical document to strip a perfectly sane woman of her human rights for financial gain?" I, Kyle stammered, his face pale as a ghost, sweat dripping down his forehead. "It's a mistake. She manipulated the data. I didn't save it," the judge barked, slamming his gavel down so hard it made Brenda flinch. "I have zero tolerance for perjury, and I have absolutely no mercy for those who attempt to weaponize the legal system to abuse family members. This guardianship petition is immediately dismissed with extreme prejudice." But Judge Harrison wasn't done. He looked over at the bailiff standing by the door. "Bailiff," the judge ordered, his voice cold as ice, "detain Mr. Vance. I am holding him in contempt of court for perjury and submitting fraudulent documents. And as of this moment, I am forwarding this entire folder of evidence to the District Attorney's Office and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. You are going to be facing severe federal charges for wire fraud, embezzlement, and bribery." Kyle started crying. Real, ugly, panicked tears. As the bailiff walked over and pulled Kyle's hands behind his back, placing him in cold steel handcuffs, Brenda completely lost her mind. She jumped out of her chair, screaming, begging the judge to let her son go, screaming that it was all my fault. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just stood there, watching the two people who had tormented me my entire life finally face the absolute, undeniable consequences of their own actions. As they dragged Kyle out of the courtroom in handcuffs, with Brenda wailing behind him, I felt a massive, invisible weight lift off my shoulders. I wasn't the invisible, helpless scapegoat anymore. I was a free woman. The aftermath of that morning in courtroom 3B was absolute chaos for Brenda and Kyle, but for me, it was the beginning of total peace. When you expose a lie that massive in a federal courtroom, the consequences don't just walk away, they snowball. Because I had handed Judge Harrison a fully documented, ironclad paper trail of their financial crimes, the federal investigators didn't have to dig very hard. The FBI raided Kyle's tech startup the very next morning. They seized all of his company's hard drives, froze his bank accounts, and officially shut down the business. During the investigation, Kyle, terrified of going to federal prison for a long time, completely folded. He turned on everyone to save his own skin. He confessed to the $75,000 bribe and handed over every text message and email he had exchanged with Dr. Adrian Cole. Dr. Cole's prestigious career was instantly destroyed. The medical board revoked his psychiatric license immediately because he had accepted a massive bribe to write a fraudulent medical report, an act that could have destroyed my entire life. He was charged with medical fraud and conspiracy. He was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison and heavily fined. As for Kyle, his fake tears and apologies in federal court didn't save him. The judge didn't care that he was a young entrepreneur. He saw a greedy, manipulative man who had tried to steal his own sister's freedom. Kyle was sentenced to 8 years in a federal penitentiary for wire fraud, perjury, and embezzlement. The golden child, who had been handed everything his entire life, was finally forced to face the real world from behind cold steel bars. And then there was Brenda. Brenda wasn't charged criminally, as Kyle had signed all the fraudulent documents himself. But her punishment was arguably worse for a woman obsessed with status and wealth. Because the $250,000 she gave to Kyle was proven to be stolen from the primary family estate, my Uncle David, the estate executor, sued her in civil court. The court ordered her to pay back every single penny to the estate. To do that, Brenda had to liquidate her luxury SUV, sell off all her expensive designer jewelry, and drain whatever meager savings she had left. The woman who used to walk around my childhood home acting like a billionaire queen was completely bankrupted. The last I heard through the family grapevine, Brenda is currently living in a tiny, run-down one-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of Charleston, working as a cashier at a local retail store just to pay her rent. No one in the family speaks to her. She is completely isolated, trapped in the exact life of poverty she always used to mock me for. Karma, as they say, never misses an address. Exactly 1 week after Kyle was taken away in handcuffs, I woke up in my beautiful historic cottage. The sun was shining through the sheer curtains, the ocean breeze was blowing through my open window, and my phone was quietly buzzing on my nightstand. It was my 33rd birthday. Later that afternoon, I drove down to the bank. I sat in a plush leather chair in the manager's office, signed 3 pieces of paper, and watched as the bank manager hit a button on his keyboard. In a matter of seconds, my father's trust officially matured. I pulled out my phone, opened my banking app, and there it was. $5,800,000. I didn't jump up and down. I didn't scream or celebrate like they do in the movies. I just sat there, looking at the numbers on my screen, and I exhaled. For the first time in my entire life, the heavy, suffocating weight of survival was completely gone. I was safe. No one could ever threaten me, control me, or manipulate me ever again. My father had made many mistakes while he was alive, but in his final act, he had built an impenetrable fortress to protect me, and I had defended it. I still live in Charleston, in my peaceful little cottage by the water. I didn't quit my job as a federal auditor. I actually love what I do too much to walk away from it. There are too many fraudsters and manipulators out there who need to be held accountable, and I am very, very good at catching them. But I did use a portion of my father's money to start something beautiful. I opened a small nonprofit legal foundation here in South Carolina. We provide free, top-tier legal representation for elderly people and vulnerable adults who are facing conservatorship fraud or financial abuse from their own greedy family members. I use my auditing skills to track the stolen money, and my foundation's lawyers fight for them in court. I make sure that no one else has to feel the sheer terror I felt when that process server handed me that manila envelope. If there is one thing I want you to take away from my story today, it's this: never apologize for protecting yourself. Toxic family members will try to convince you that setting boundaries makes you the villain. They will call you crazy, selfish, or paranoid just for refusing to let them use you. Don't believe them. Keep your head down, work hard in silence, and build your own strength. You don't have to yell to be powerful. Sometimes, the most dangerous person in the room is the one who sits quietly, letting the arrogant people dig their own graves. Thank you so much for spending your time with me today and letting me share my journey. I know it was a long one, but I hope it brought you some comfort, some hope, or maybe just a satisfying smile. If you enjoyed this story, please take a moment to like the video and leave a comment. I truly do read every single one. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to our channel. It helps us keep bringing these stories to life. Take care of yourselves, protect your peace, and I will see you in the next story.